The main theme of the story, an alien woman suffering from infertility is paired with a human partner to overcome her reproductive limitations, and the unexpected outcome of this union surprises everyone. Lyra floated through the narrow corridor of Celestara Prime's orbital station, her long ears trailing behind her like twin banners caught in a gentle wind. She had perfected the art of moving with deliberate elegance, but zero gravity had a way of turning elegance into slapstick. Twice she had narrowly avoided colliding with the maintenance drones, their blinking lights flashing an impolite "watch it" in digital tones. The human scientists who designed these drones swore they had programmed a sense of humor, but Lyra suspected it was only a cruel prank against anyone who could fly too gracefully. She rolled her eyes, metaphorically of course, because literal eye-rolling in zero gravity was tricky, and made her way to the observation chamber. Today, the Council of Life would reveal the human selected as her experimental partner. She had rehearsed her skepticism, her polite disinterest, even her dramatic sighs for maximum effect. She hadn't rehearsed Elias Reed tripping over a panel within 10 seconds of entering the room, hands flailing, muttering, "I swear I meant to do that." Lyra's ears twitched with amusement, though she tried to hide it behind a veneer of professional reserve. She had seen humans before, of course, but none had ever been assigned to her, a pairing considered improbable, ridiculous even. The council had argued that humans had an unpredictable combination of genetics, humor, and stubborn survival instinct that might trigger something in the Zariel reproductive system. Lyra, for her part, had argued that humans were messy, prone to sneezing in inappropriate situations, and unlikely to respect the solemnity of a laboratory. But as Elias attempted a clumsy bow and missed entirely, spinning halfway into a nearby anti-gravity wall, she could not help but feel a tiny, infuriating spark of curiosity. The council members, a mix of Zariel elders and human representatives, tried to suppress their laughter. One elder, a particularly tall figure with multiple layered robes, leaned forward and hissed, "Do not let this creature frighten you, Lyra. He is essential for science." Lyra's ears flicked. "Frighten me?" she said, her voice smooth with just a hint of irony. "I am the one on a zero-gravity stage waiting to see if science will fumble spectacularly." Elias, oblivious to her sarcasm, grinned. "Stage? Oh, I like stage metaphors, makes my inevitable mistakes feel theatrical." Lyra tried to focus on the council's briefing. They spoke of cellular compatibility, quantum DNA resonance, and the unprecedented nature of hybrid gestation. Technical terms floated in the air like holographic diagrams, some blinking gently with helpful labels that Elias promptly touched, causing a cascade of accidental sparks. Lyra had to resist laughing as the human muttered apologies to the holograms, bowing as if he had personally insulted a floating neon triangle. When the briefing ended, Lyra and Elias were left alone in the chamber. The human immediately attempted conversation in what he clearly considered his most charming tone. "So, do we start with small talk or jump straight into awkward interspecies bonding exercises?" He winked. Lyra tilted her head, letting one ear flick inquisitively. "Awkward bonding exercises are generally a council requirement?" she asked, dryly. Elias chuckled, and she felt a flicker of warmth she could not entirely place. "Only for the record books. Otherwise, they just leave us floating awkwardly in sterile rooms and call it progress." Their first joint experiment involved something as mundane as touching hands to exchange genetic samples, but in zero gravity, even mundane tasks became chaotic ballet. Elias kept bumping into Lyra, apologizing profusely, and at one point even floated upside down for several seconds before managing to right himself with a grunt. Lyra's ears twitched involuntarily, brushing against the edge of a control panel, and she muttered, "Humans really should come with gravity training manuals." Elias laughed, nodding, "Or hazard insurance for every awkward maneuver. I can see the policy now. Clumsy humans cause galactic emergencies." Lyra's lips curved in a near smile, the first genuine amusement she had allowed herself since the council began the pairing. Over the following days, they navigated routines of floating examinations, quantum biomonitoring, and bizarre taste tests involving nutrient gels that glowed in response to Zariel DNA. Elias developed a habit of making bad jokes about every gel he tried, claiming they tasted like interstellar neon with a hint of regret. Lyra would roll her eyes, her ears flicking in rhythm to his antics. Slowly, the initial tension between them softened, replaced by a rhythm of companionship punctuated by small, absurd victories, like Elia's successfully maneuvering a floating test tube without dropping it, or Lyra laughing at a human pun that made absolutely no sense. One evening, they floated together in the observation deck, staring out at the swirling nebulae outside the station's glass walls. Elias attempted a dramatic pose with his arms wide, as if commanding the cosmos itself, but nearly drifted into the wall. Lyra reached out, steadying him with one hand while her other ear twitched in amusement. "You know," she said, her voice carrying a mix of incredulity and teasing, "humans are far more entertaining than I expected. And perhaps more resilient than I gave you credit for." Elias grinned. "Entertaining is my specialty, resilient, well, let's just hope it's contagious." Despite the humor and the chaos, Lyra sensed a shift within herself. The experiment, designed to solve a biological dilemma, was revealing something entirely unexpected. Elia's clumsy charm, his ability to turn disaster into laughter, was slowly breaking down the walls she had built around her sterile, controlled existence. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something deeper than scientific obligation, curiosity, excitement, and perhaps even a sense of hope that defied logic. And somewhere in the midst of jokes, floating panels, and twitching ears, Lyra realized that while the Council had intended this pairing to solve a problem of biology, it was doing something far more complicated. It was teaching her about humans, about resilience, and about the unpredictable, messy, and sometimes hilarious ways that connection could form. She had no idea what the future held, but as Elias laughed at his own failed attempts to pilot a diagnostic drone, she allowed herself a tiny, private smile. Perhaps the experiment was not just about biology. It was about discovering how chaos, humor, and unexpected companionship could ignite a spark where no one had dared to hope. Time passed with the gentle rhythm of zero gravity and the constant hum of the station's life systems. They shared awkward meals, tangled with floating wires, and argued over whether a holographic chart of cellular resonance could double as a board game. Lyra's ears twitched each time Elias made an improbable, bad pun, and she found herself correcting him less and laughing more. The council watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, noting every spark of amusement as if it were a critical data point. And for the first time, Lyra felt that the human assigned to her was not just an unpredictable variable to be monitored, but a companion who might survive both the laboratory and the gravity of her own expectations. By the time the first week ended, Lyra and Elias had settled into a rhythm of chaotic cooperation, punctuated with humor, teasing, and quiet moments of unexpected camaraderie. It was not love, she told herself firmly, but it was something like it, a warmth in the sterile cold of the station that made her long ears flick in contemplative, almost mischievous patterns. She knew the experiment was only beginning, and the council's ultimate goal remained uncertain. But for now, amidst floating panels, neon nutrient gels, and human mishaps, Lyra allowed herself to imagine that perhaps the cosmos had a sense of humor after all. The days aboard Celestara Prime settled into a peculiar rhythm, a blend of zero-gravity choreography and scientific monotony, punctuated by the occasional misadventure that only Elias could manufacture. Lyra found herself both exasperated and amused by his endless curiosity, which manifested in everything from inspecting airlocks with improvised measuring devices to asking if the station's coffee replicator could be tuned to produce interstellar cappuccinos with quantum foam. She had long ago stopped correcting him, discovering that his failures, accidents, and incessant questions were becoming the soundtrack of her life, oddly comforting in their unpredictability. Her long ears twitched whenever he approached, a subtle barometer of her irritation or delight, though she refused to admit the latter aloud. Their mornings began with the station's routine diagnostics. Elias, somehow turning even the most sterile tasks into slapstick comedy, would fumble with bio-monitoring instruments, accidentally pressing the wrong buttons, and causing holographic charts to spin like miniature galaxies around them. One day, a floating display projected a rainbow of DNA strands circling in chaotic orbits, Elias spun in the midst of them, declaring himself the galactic dance master of genetics. Lyra, steadying a spinning console with one hand and tugging his sleeve with the other, couldn't help but let out a laugh she tried to stifle. "You're not dancing," she said, her voice flat, but her ears flicked in amusement. "You're performing a gravitational hazard demonstration." Despite his fumbling, Elias proved to have an uncanny intuition about the subtleties of Zariel biology. He would ask questions that seemed absurd, like whether her ears could detect subtle emotional fluctuations in other species, but his observations often led to small breakthroughs. Lyra found herself both impressed and annoyed by his knack for stumbling into insight. During one late-night session in the observation deck, Elias floated upside down, dangling from the ceiling in an attempt to simulate alternate gravitational perspectives. He pointed to a holographic model of her cells and asked, "Do you think they like jazz?" Lyra blinked. "Jazz?" she asked, a hand on her temple, ears flicking in disbelief. "Cells do not listen to jazz," he grinned. "Yet. But if they did, maybe it would encourage cooperation." She sighed, but a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Their living quarters became a microcosm of controlled chaos. Nutrient gels often collided midair, floating lazily in zero gravity like colorful jellyfish. Elias tried to create gel art, which involved smearing glows of bioluminescent nutrients across the walls, only to have them drift into the air vents. Lyra would sigh, chasing the rogue blobs with a sterilization pad, muttering about the absurdity of assigning humans to interspecies experiments. Yet every mishap was softened by laughter. Even the station's AI began to integrate Elia's jokes into its daily announcements, calling floating nutrient gels rogue jellyfish of questionable origin. One afternoon, while attempting to calibrate a quantum DNA resonator, Elias accidentally activated the station's gravity modulation field. Both he and Lyra drifted helplessly as gravity fluctuated wildly, pinning them intermittently to walls, ceilings, and consoles. Lyra's ears twitched in protest, her hands gripping a floating railing to keep from smacking into a console. Elias, ever cheerful, declared, "It's a zero-G tango, shall we waltz, madam?" She gave a dry laugh, correcting his orientation with a firm nudge. "I do not waltz in uncontrolled physics experiments, Captain." His ears, human ears of course, though less expressive, perked anyway, as though acknowledging her rare spark of humor. Over time, their relationship deepened in subtle ways. Elias began leaving small, absurd gifts in her quarters. A floating feather he claimed came from a zero-gravity bird species he invented, a holographic kitten that chased laser dots, and even a handmade star map with improbable constellations named after inside jokes only they understood. Lyra, in turn, found herself watching him with a quiet fascination, noting the earnestness in his clumsy attempts at caring, the way he approached problems not with cold logic but with improvisation and laughter. Her ears flicked more often now, betraying her curiosity and amusement even when she maintained her formal, alien composure. The council grew increasingly interested in the pair's progress. Observers noted that Elia's unpredictability, rather than being a liability, seemed to trigger subtle biological responses in Lyra that no previous human pairing had achieved. Quantum resonance spikes, slight increases in cellular flexibility, and a curious bioluminescent glow in her tissues were recorded, each attributed in part to laughter, emotional engagement, and the human capacity for improvisation. Lyra herself noticed changes she could not entirely quantify, a warmth when he floated near, a rapid flick of her ears at his voice, a softening of rigidity she had carried for decades. One evening, a routine monitoring session led to an unexpected breakthrough. Elias, tired but still fiddling with the instruments, accidentally aligned the DNA resonator at a unique angle. The holographic strands danced in harmony, forming patterns that glowed softly with life potential. Lyra's ears quivered in astonishment, her hands hovering above the console. This is unprecedented," she whispered. Elias, grinning, shrugged. "Accidental genius is still genius, right?" She allowed herself a laugh, ear flicking involuntarily. "In some dimensions, yes." Evenings often ended in quiet camaraderie. They would drift side by side in the observation deck, watching swirling nebulae and distant stars, their conversation a mix of scientific speculation and absurd humor. Elias would invent ridiculous stories about alien bureaucrats taking bribes from sentient coffee machines, while Lyra found herself responding with sarcastic commentary that made her ears twitch with amusement. The absurdity of their situation, a human and an alien paired for reproductive experimentation, was softened by shared laughter and mutual curiosity. Yet beneath the humor, both sensed the weight of the experiment. The Council's expectations, the potential for failure, and the inherent unpredictability of their union lingered in the air, like static electricity before a storm. But instead of dread, Lyra felt a peculiar kind of anticipation. Elias, with all his clumsy charm and impossible optimism, had turned the sterile scientific environment into something alive, something vibrant, something unpredictable in the best possible way. By the end of the second week, their bond had grown into a delicate balance of humor, trust, and curiosity. Every misstep, every floating gel, every botched hologram became part of the unspoken language between them. Elia's laughter, warm and irrepressible, had a gravity of its own, pulling Lyra into a new orbit of feeling she had long abandoned for certainty and control. In turn, Lyra's steady presence, sharp intelligence, and subtle teasing taught Elias restraint, patience, and the joy of small victories in a universe where most things were vast, cold, and indifferent. As the day ended, Lyra floated near a viewport, watching the swirling lights of a nearby star cluster. Elias hovered beside her, pretending to conduct an orchestra of cosmic dust with exaggerated gestures. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Their experiment was no longer simply about biology or council expectations. It was about discovering the improbable ways connection could grow between two beings from entirely different worlds. And for the first time, Lyra felt that what they were creating together might be far more remarkable than anyone, human, Zariel, or otherwise, had imagined. The station buzzed with unusual energy, a mix of anticipation and mild chaos that only grew as the council prepared to witness the culmination of their ambitious experiment. Lyra drifted through the corridors, her long ears flicking with every passing vibration of the station's engines. She had grown accustomed to the unpredictability of life with Elias, and yet even she could feel a subtle hum of tension in the air. This was the moment that mattered, the proof that their union, improbable and comical as it had been, might actually yield something miraculous. Elias, as usual, was anything but composed. He floated beside her, attempting to balance a tray of nutrient gels that gleamed with soft bioluminescence, and failed spectacularly, sending one jellyfish-like blob spinning into a corner. "Gravity's clearly conspiring against me," he muttered, diving after it like a clumsy cosmic diver. Lyra's ears twitched, and she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "If gravity is conspiring, it is doing so purely for entertainment purposes," she said, catching the stray gel with the tip of her finger before it hit a panel. Elias grinned, shrugging. "Well, at least someone appreciates my contributions to science and chaos." They arrived at the observation chamber where the council waited, and the sterile air was thick with anticipation. Lyra could sense the collective gaze of the assembly, the silent calculations, and the subtle judgments. Yet she no longer felt the weight of fear or obligation. Her focus was on Elias, on the tiny humor in his nervous gestures, the way his hair floated slightly as he drifted beside her. They had been partners in chaos, in laughter, in small victories and mishaps, and now the culmination of weeks of absurd and meticulous work was about to be revealed. The human and Zariel hybrid gestation pod floated into the center of the room, bathed in soft light. Holographic panels hummed and shimmered, tracking every minute detail of cellular development, quantum resonance, and biochemical synchrony. Lyra's ears flicked in anticipation, scanning the readings. Elias hovered nearby, muttering, "Well, if it's a disaster, at least we'll have stories for the next 1,000 years, right?" Lyra couldn't help the brief smirk that tugged at her lips. "Disaster has not yet occurred," she said, though her ears twitched with nervous excitement. Then the pod's soft hum shifted, and a small, luminous figure emerged. Its skin shimmered with faint, bioluminescent patterns, delicate but alive, moving with a curious grace that seemed almost absurdly improbable. Its tiny ears twitched in perfect harmony with Lyra's, a miniature echo of her own form, and its eyes, large, gleaming, and impossibly bright, focused on the world with innocent curiosity. Gasps echoed through the chamber, though Elias immediately quipped, "I think it likes me, or it's plotting something I can't tell yet." Lyra's ears flicked sharply, half amusement, half incredulity. "Plotting is optimistic," she said, "though certainly within its rights." The council erupted into a mixture of awe and scientific scribbling, attempting to record the impossible combination of human and Zariel genetics. One elder, flustered but impressed, commented on the glowing patterns in the child's skin. "It defies all previous models," they murmured, almost whispering. Elias floated closer to Lyra, whispering, "We broke biology." Or reassembled it in a funnier shape. Lyra's ear twitched in exasperated amusement. "I do not know if funny is the term for a milestone in species evolution," she said, though her hands hovered protectively around the pod. As the day unfolded, they learned more about the child. It responded to sound, light, and touch with remarkable sensitivity, its tiny body already demonstrating unusual adaptability. Lyra found herself laughing at the child's instinctive reactions to zero gravity, at its attempts to chase a floating nutrient gel that spun like a tiny galaxy. Elias, of course, took the moment seriously in his own absurd way, narrating the chase as though it were an interstellar sports event, complete with play-by-play commentary and imaginary referees. Lyra could not help but laugh, her ears flicking in delight, realizing that life had become richer, lighter, and more unpredictable than she had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Lyra reflected on her own transformation. She had begun the experiment with skepticism, a sense of isolation, and a reliance on control and routine. Elias had shattered her expectations with chaos, humor, and the kind of optimism that bordered on foolishness. But in doing so, he had taught her about trust, laughter, and the strange alchemy that occurred when two beings from different worlds chose to connect, care, and improvise together. Her ears twitched with new awareness, responding to subtle tones, gestures, and the rhythms of life she had long ignored. Elias, for his part, seemed unchanged on the surface, still fumbling, still making jokes, still tripping over cables and floating panels. But Lyra saw his own growth, his deepening patience, his subtle attentiveness, the way he adjusted his clumsy approach to support her without diminishing his humor. They had both learned in their separate ways the art of collaboration, of resilience, and of finding joy in the improbable. The council eventually convened to formalize the outcome. Lyra and Elias had succeeded beyond any expectation. The child was healthy, responsive, and a living bridge between species, a symbol of hope and possibility. The council debated ethics, future research, and interspecies collaboration, but Lyra found herself smiling at the absurdity of it all. She and Elias had created life in the most unlikely way, and yet it felt entirely natural, full of warmth, humor, and a spark of chaos that neither biology nor bureaucracy could contain. Later, in the quiet of their quarters, Lyra watched the child floating between them, reaching out with tiny fingers and cooing with luminous delight. Elias drifted closer, balancing precariously, and muttered, "You know, I think we might actually be parental material. Or at least comedic parental material." Lyra's ears twitched sharply, and for once she laughed openly. "Comedic, yes," she said, "but surprisingly competent in ways you would not expect." They floated together, a human, a Zariel, and their luminous child, in the gentle hum of Celestora Prime. The chaos, laughter, and improbable success of their experiment had transformed them. Lyra felt lighter, more open to unpredictability, and deeply aware of the bonds that could form across worlds. Elias felt, perhaps for the first time, that his clumsy optimism had a tangible,